A20 history, World War II in Europe class. And this is the first lecture of the semester. Um, as you can already tell, I'm a little shaky. I've had the summer off, but I'm just going to power through. Um, what we're going to talk about in this lecture, or in this podcast, part of the lecture, is Snyder's book. And I want you all to look at the map of Europe before World War One and after World War One. You're going to be quizzed on that. I've posted a map. And that'll be the first part of the podcast lecture, and there'll be other aspects of the war that I'm going to talk about as well. So the first thing I want to talk, what you're seeing in front of you, if you're watching this on the screen, is Europe before World War One. You know what? While I've got you here, I'm just going to see if I can change. Yeah, great, good. Okay, so let me talk briefly about the Snyder book. I gave you quite extensive, a quite extensive study guide of the Snyder book, where I pulled out chapters from the book. To be honest with you, you could probably just read those chapters I pulled out and do okay next week in the quiz. I guess more motivated students, or maybe another way to put it is students with more time on their hands, will read the chapters or the reading that I posted in the syllabus. That's my preference. But the reason I pulled out the material is I think that reading for this week is pretty tough. It's pretty complex. This is not a period of history most of you know about. Stalin was actually, you're reading about the collectivization efforts and also the Great Purge of the 1930s in Russia. So you're starting the course probably where a lot of you didn't expect to start it, in the Soviet Union during the 1930s. But that's where Snyder starts his book, because what he's looking at the combination of Hitler and Stalin during, let's put it like this, the era of World War II. So it expands beyond the fighting that began in 1939. And I think it's really appropriate. And one of the things I want, and I think that he does well, and I think that you as students should know about, is his research into the mass killings by the Soviet government, the government in Russia, the Soviet Union, and the Nazis during the 1930s and 1940s. So he's writing about that. Now, he's also in some ways, so it's expansive in terms of time. He starts in the 30s and he goes into the post-war period. But in another way, he limits his book, because he's not really writing, as you'll see, about the war per se, the fighting per se. He doesn't really talk about soldiers that much. What he's focused on is the civilian victims in what he calls the Bloodlands. And the Bloodlands is the area of Eastern Europe and the western part of the Soviet Union. Okay, let me see if I can share this screen here. Okay, so this is post-World War II Europe. When he's talking about the Bloodlands, what he's talking about basically is the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He's talking about Poland, of course, where many of the concentration camps were, Romania to a certain extent, Hungary. But he's also talking about Ukraine, the area of the Soviet Union, which is now the independent Republic of Ukraine, which of course is involved in a war against the Soviet Union. It's not the Soviet Union. Ukraine's involved in a war against Russia. What Putin's trying to do, in some respect, is to create a new Soviet Union. Belarus, this area here, which is a part of the world and a part of the Soviet Union that many of us are not that familiar with. So what he has done is he's looking, this is what he calls the Bloodlands. It's that part of Eastern Europe and the Western Soviet Union where civilians fell victim to both Stalin and Hitler. 14 million civilians killed in this period in the 1930s and 1940s. So he's looking at a zone in Europe during a particular time frame. And what he's talking about is the 14 million innocent civilians that died. And he's trying to correct the way we remember what happened. When we think about this period, most of us, even me, are very, very much focused on Hitler, the Holocaust, the murder of Jews, homosexuals, gypsies in the death camps, Auschwitz, Treblinka, the notorious death camps. But he also wants to remind us that Stalin was a murderer as well. Now, of course, the thing that's complicated, and one of the things that we're going to investigate in this course, is Stalin ultimately becomes the ally of the United States and Great Britain. So the US and Great Britain ally with one of the great murderers of this time period. And we'll talk about the complexities of that. Now, it's something that had to be done. The US and Great Britain had to ally with Stalin. Hitler and Stalin were both terrible, but from the point of view of US interest, Hitler was worse than Stalin, but they're both really, really terrible. So he's talking about the zone in Europe. He's talking about mass murder in the zone. And he's trying to talk about what the ties were, the complexities, how these events work together, how Hitler and Stalin kind of worked with each other and against each other in this period, and just to give us a more powerful sense of what's going on in Europe during this period. Now, I want to show you real briefly, and I'll send you the link to this. I'm gonna give you a bit of a map quiz next week in the class, because I don't know, this may be a horrible thing to say, but I'm not sure that you understand the geography of Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union. And if I'm wrong, I really apologize. I want to show you first Europe before World War I. For some reason, my screen's getting shaky here. Oh, there it goes. And now it's got to come back here. Okay, second. I think my connections are loose here. Okay. So this is Europe before World War I. And what you had during World War I, you had the collapse of three empires. You had a collapse of the Austria-Hungary Empire, and out of that, you get nations such as Czechoslovakia, Austria, those kinds of nations which are familiar to us today, Serbia, Bulgaria. So you in Central Europe, you get the collapse of the Hungary, of course you get the collapse of the Austria Empire during and after the war. You get a collapse of the Ottoman Empire as well, and this is how we get the modern Middle East, except for Israel. Israel was created in 1949. And you get the collapse of the Soviet Empire. So I'm not going to test you on this. I just want to say, make the point that you get the collapse of these three empires after World War I, which is going to cause a tremendous shakeup, which is going to have a really significant effect on the geopolitics of Europe in the post-war period, and be one of the key factors in leading to World War II. So don't get too fussed. I'm not going to test you on the three empires that dissolved or were dissolved during World War I. I just want you to get a sense of the whole. So now I do want to move to the part I will test you on, and that is Europe after World War I. And again, I'll send you this link, and I'll post it on Blackboard if you want to take a look. It's kind of a beautiful map. So it's a whole different story after World War I. So no more Austria Empire, for instance. What we have is Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, where my wife is from. Actually, Romania was a big winner in World War I because it got parts of Hungary, which Transylvania, of course, Transylvania is much more famous for, that's where Dracula was from. Anyway, so Austria gains territory during this period. Then also Eastern countries in Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia. Again, these were countries that were part of the Austro-Hungary Empire. So basically, what I want you to know for next week, I want you to know where Czechoslovakia is. I want you to know Poland. I want you to know Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, also Ukraine. This period, the borders between Poland and Ukraine during this period. I want you to know the general area of the Soviet Union where the Ukraine exists. Ukraine is, as you'll see, is very important for both Stalin and Hitler because it's a breadbasket. To this day, it's a breadbasket. A large percentage of the world's wheat is grown in the steppes of Ukraine. Belarus, Belarusian USSR is in this area here. So this is the areas that I want you to know of the Soviet Union. Again, Ukraine, Belarus. I want you to know Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Poland, it's very important that you know where Poland is. It's probably the key player here in ways that I'll talk about later in the lecture. Also, the countries that come out of Austria-Hungary Empire, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Austria. Western Europe is really pretty much the same after World War I. It's Central and Eastern Europe that are very, very different after World War I. So what I want you to do is, you should, go, what the heck, go ahead and know where Finland is, because that's going to play a key role in the war as well. So what I want you to do is familiarize yourself with Central Europe, with Eastern Europe, and with the western part of the Soviet Union, because much of World War II, you could argue that this is the cockpit of World War II. This is kind of the central area of fighting, but it's also the central area of the mass murder in the bloodlands that Snyder talks about, where 14 million innocent men, women, and children were killed, on top of millions and millions of soldiers. So, in other words, familiarize yourself with the borders of Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and the western part of the Soviet Union. Okay, so I'm going to end this particular podcast here and then go into another subject.